The Fort Erie Podcast with Brent Jones. Brent Jones starts now.
Hey, that's me. I'm Brent Jones. Welcome to the Fort Erie Podcast. This is episode number 63. I hope you had a great long weekend. There's going to be a ton packed into today's new episode. In fact, in just a minute, I'm going to be announcing a huge giveaway that I'm running for the month of August. I'm calling it the Green Acres 50-50-50 giveaway, and that's because I'm giving away $150 in gift cards to Green Acres Family Restaurant on Garrison Road. Anybody can win this. Please don't skip ahead. I know some of you like to skip all over the episode, skip to your favorite part. Don't do that. Just hang on. In just a moment, I'm going to tell you how you can win those gift cards. My guest for this episode will be Ashley Michelle, who I like to call an international woman of mystery because she has no last name. She just goes by Ashley Michelle, which is kind of cool. She's the owner of the Yoga Dome, owner and operator, I should say, the Yoga Dome, of course, on Ridgemount Road. And she's the host of the Spiritual Woo podcast. And I split our conversation into two parts. The first half of our chat, we'll be talking about the Yoga Dome. That's coming up shortly. And then later in the episode, we'll get to the second half of our chat regarding her brand new show, the Spiritual Woo podcast, which she launched just this summer. And by the way, on the topic of podcasts, I've got an article pulled up here. There are apparently nearly 4 million podcasts in the world, and there are more than 460 million global podcast listeners. Podcasts are really catching on. I mean, it's something like 1 in every 4 people who have internet access listen to podcasts. And this is going to be, if my memory serves, I believe Ashley Michelle will be my first time having another local podcaster on the Fort Erie podcast. And mostly that's just because there aren't that many of us. Okay, so I compiled a short list here of all the Fort Erie-based podcasts that I'm aware of. And I say Fort Erie-based, not Fort Erie-focused, meaning the hosts of these shows are from the town of Fort Erie. It does not necessarily mean their show is specifically about Fort Erie, like this one. So as an example, we've got Life As A, that's the title of the podcast, Life As A ... That's hosted by Christopher Schoenwald, who I believe lives abroad. I think he's in Japan, but he's native to Fort Erie. Angels Live in My Town. I'm assuming many of you are familiar with that show. It's hosted by the two Mikes, let's call them Mike A and Mike D. My wife, Andrea Jones, she has a podcast called the Savvy Social Podcast. It's all about social media marketing. It often ranks in the top 100 U.S. marketing podcasts. There's the Spahar Initiative, hosted by Rob Spahar, who's based in Ridgeway. There used to be a show I loved, I listened to all the time, called A Podcast with Goat, but that was discontinued a few years ago. I think I was actually a guest on that show one time. You can still find some of the old episodes on Apple Podcasts. Then there's some of our local churches upload their sermons as a podcast every week. Now, I might have missed some in there. I'm not sure. If you're aware of another Fort Erie podcast that I've missed, please let me know. Call the Byrd Box, 289-599-2973. Leave me a message because I'd be happy to check it out. And if you decide to give some of these other shows I've just mentioned, if you decide to give them a listen, maybe reach out to the host or leave a comment or something. Let them know that Brent sent you, because I'd be happy to collaborate with other podcasters here in town. And I mentioned I have an article pulled up in front of me. I actually have another article. I have 2 articles here. I was doing some digging, and as it turns out, just based on the numbers, the Fort Erie podcast is actually one of the most downloaded podcasts in the entire world. Believe it or not, folks. You're probably wondering, well, what does that mean? Does the Fort Erie podcast get millions and millions of downloads, of listens? No, of course not. Of course not. We're not getting, look, my show, the Fort Erie podcast, is really only intended for the town of Fort Erie, a town of 30 some odd thousand people. I doubt anybody living outside of our town would bother listening to this show. So my objective starting the Fort Erie podcast was never to attract millions of listeners, because I just don't think that's realistic. A typical episode of the Fort Erie podcast gets about 200 to 250 downloads, sometimes more, but that's pretty typical. Now, is that what it takes? Is that really what it takes to have one of the most downloaded podcasts in the entire world? In a word, yes. Okay. According to Buzzsprout, and some of you may know Buzzsprout is arguably the largest distributor of podcasts in the world. They host something like 126,000 different podcasts. According to Buzzsprout, they state that if a new episode of your show gets more than 32 downloads or 32 listeners in its first 7 days online, congratulations, you are in the top 50% of all podcasts in the world. Isn't that crazy? 32 listeners. That's what it takes to be in the top half. If you get more than 112 downloads in the first 7 days on your new episodes. That puts you in the top 25%, which this show does consistently. So look at that. The Fort Erie podcast, globally, a top 25% podcast. We're beating 3/4 of the competition, which I think is kind of cool. If you are curious, what would it take to get into the top 1%, the top 1% of podcasts? The answer is 5,097 downloads in the first 7 days per new episode, which basically in our town would work out to 1 in every 6 Fort Erie residents tuning into this show every single week. So I guess all I can suggest, listeners, is tell your friends about this show.
Fun and games on the Fort Erie podcast.
Fun and games on the Fort Erie podcast. I thought I would announce my Green Acres 50-50-50 giveaway. This giveaway is running for the month of August. And what I've done is I've purchased 3 $50 gift cards to Green Acres Family Restaurant on Garrison Road. That's $150 in gift cards. And I'm going to be talking about this plenty for the balance of the month on the Fort Erie podcast. Now, whether you have lived here a long time, whether you're brand new to town, I'm sure most of you know Green Acres Family Restaurant. It's on Garrison Road. It's been a family business, in business for over 60 years, and they have a great selection of menu items, large portions, good food. And by the way, I'm not being paid to say any of that, okay? I bought these gift cards myself. I bought them out of my own pocket with my own money because I like to support local businesses, and I also like to reward listeners of this show. So grab a pen and paper because I'm going to tell you right now how you can win these 3 gift cards. There could be 3 different winners, or one person could actually win all 3, because technically the Green Acres 50-50-50 giveaway is actually 3 separate $50 giveaways. Hence the name I gave it. Okay. The first gift card, how to win the first $50 gift card. This one is a draw. This one is totally up to chance, but you got to play to win. You go to theforteriepodcast.com, theforteriepodcast.com, click the giveaway link at the top of the page. It will take you to a new page. On that new page, it will ask you to enter your first name and your email address. Do that. And then the first week of September, I will draw one lucky winner to take home that first $50 gift card. The second $50 gift card you can win by leaving a message on the Byrd Box. Now, if you have never listened to the Fort Erie podcast before, if you're saying, what is a Byrd Box? Well, it's the voicemail box, the voicemail answering machine that I have set up for this show. Anyone from around town can call the Byrd Box 24 hours a day and squawk about anything they want, and then I play those messages on the show, on the Fort Erie podcast. The messages you leave, they could be serious or they could be silly. They could be about something good, bad, or otherwise. They could be about something you've heard on the show, something you saw around town, or maybe just an awkward experience with a stranger you had at Tim Hortons. It really doesn't matter. I call it the Byrd Box because the last 4 digits of the phone number spell BYRD. It's the only thing I could spell with those last 4 numbers. I'm going to be getting to the Byrd Box segment in today's episode a little bit later, but anyone who leaves a message on the Byrd Box in the month of August is automatically goes into this draw. And every additional message you leave is one additional entry. The phone number is 289-599-2973, 289-599-BYRD Byrd. The third $50 gift card that you can win is by playing Fort Erie Trivia. I'm putting it up as a prize. Again, if you've listened to the Fort Erie podcast for some time, you know that I like to do a recurring segment on the show where I get 2 local callers to go head to head, battling to prove the supremacy of their Fort Erie knowledge. Actually, most of the questions I ask are pretty easy. Okay, so you don't have to be an expert like historian on Fort Erie to be able to win this. But the contestant who gets to 3 correct answers first usually ends up winning pizza. But this next round of Fort Erie trivia we do, it's going to be $50 to Green Acres Family Restaurant. So to be a contestant, if you want a chance to be a contestant in the next round of Fort Erie Trivia on the Fort Erie podcast, all you have to do is text your first name to me. My cell phone number is 905-626-8826. That's 905-626-8826. Just text me your first name and say, I want to play trivia. It's really that easy. So that's it. The Green Acres 50-50-50 giveaway going on this month, the month of August 2023. 3 ways to enter. 1, go to theforteriepodcast.com. Click giveaway at the top of the page. 2, leave a message on the Byrd Box, 289-599-2973. Or 3, text your first name to 905-626-8826 and tell me you want to play in the next round of Fort Erie Trivia.
Fort Erie Questions and Answers, based on the Facebook group by the same name.
Welcome to Fort Erie Questions and Answers. This is the part of the show where I go through the Facebook group by the same name and pick out any questions and answers that I thought were especially interesting or helpful. And for this round, I found a mix of both. Let's get right into it. Chris asks, is Fort Erie getting a Crocs store? Now, I have to admit, first and foremost, I had no idea there was such a thing as a Crocs store, a store that sells nothing but Crocs. I found that part crazy. I had to Google it. Turns out it's true. There really are stores that sell nothing but Crocs. I'm also going to confess here that I have never worn Crocs because I think they're ugly. I think they look dumb. Sorry. Hey, if you love Crocs, I get it. I mean, people who own Crocs, they can't go 5 minutes without telling you how comfortable their Crocs are and how they're a new convert. They swore they would never wear this awful footwear. They would never, ever buy Crocs, but then they did, and now they love it, and you should try it too. And I have no time for any of that. Anyway, I find it incredible that there is such a thing as a store that sells nothing but Crocs. Now, is one coming to Fort Erie? That's the real question. Somebody replied here in the comments and said they have seen job postings on Indeed for not only a Fort Erie location, but also a new location in Niagara Falls. But most of the comments I saw was just a lot of enthusiasm from people saying, yay, I hope there really is a Crocs store coming to Fort Erie. How can this town really, do we have the population really to support a store that sells nothing but Crocs? I don't know. Maybe it's going to happen. Maybe it won't. Time will tell. Then Linda asks, where can I go in Fort Erie to have my garden shears sharpened? And the most popular response that I saw in the comments was Danny's Locksmith and Sharpening Service on Niagara Boulevard. So Danny will sharpen all sorts of things: knives, scissors, lawnmower blades, skates, whatever. Like anything you've got that you need sharpened, take it to Danny. He can do it for you. Nicole asks, is McDonald's still giving out Safari Niagara free child admissions in Happy Meals? Now, again, this is like the Crocs store thing. This is something that I didn't even know was a thing. If you check the comments, everybody said yes. Yeah, go buy a Happy Meal for your kid at McDonald's. They will get a free admission to Safari Niagara. But again, I'd never heard anything about this, so I thought I would contact Safari Niagara directly. I got an email back from them, and they said, yes, the Happy Meal McDonald's promotion is still going on for this year. All locations in the Niagara region are participating. All locations in Niagara. Wow, you can go to any McDonald's. And then the email concludes, they will stop giving them out sometime in September, but we can't be entirely sure on an exact date. I think that's very cool. Like, that is way better to get admission to Safari Niagara. That's way better than the cheapy little Happy Meal toys that I remember getting back when I was a kid. Then Joel says, I'm looking for quotes to have my bathtub taken out and a shower put in. Now, there were quite a few different suggestions for companies that would do this, like Horns Home Renos, for example. But the most common response that I saw was LC Designer Tiles, and they're based out of Ridgeway. And the last one I wanted to touch on, Fernando asks, who raises sunken concrete slabs? And I get what he's asking, like the concrete pads, the ones that have sunken into the ground or, end up being all unlevel. The most common response that I saw, and there were a few different responses, but the one that came up the most was Wavecrest Concrete Raising, which is also based out of Ridgeway.
The Fort Erie Podcast.
All right, joining me on the phone right now, I've got Ashley Michelle. Ashley, how you doing?
I am good. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. I'm well. I love your energy.
Oh, thank you. I work hard at that energy.
Is that? I guess that's part of the job. When you're the owner of the Yoga Dome, you've got the Spiritual Woo podcast. I feel like being positive and energetic is just part of the job description.
It is part of the job description, yes, but it's also a lifestyle. So that's what I am promoting both with the Yoga Dome and the podcast, is this kind of high vibe, good energy lifestyle, if you will.
Well, I like that. I like that. Tell listeners your story for people who maybe aren't familiar with either of those projects. I mean, you, as I understand it, there was a series of roads that led you to where you are now, right? So what's your story?
Yeah, so we only have, 15 minutes? I'll speed that up for you.
Take as long as you need.
Yeah, So I am originally, my background is bar owning and karaoke hosting. My partner and I own a brewery in Niagara Falls, which is Tap's Brew House. We've been there for 15 years, and that was my life for, even before I was into Taps, that was my life for 25 years. Bar scene, drinking, partying, rock star life. That's where I wanted to go, and that's what I wanted to do until I realized that it was not sustainable for me anymore. And I kind of had a couple of, we all do have these big moments in life, these big realizations, if you will, where you're kind of like, okay, do I actually want this for my life? Do I want to continue this journey, waking up hungover every day and partying every single night? And the answer was no, in a nutshell. And along the way, I had stumbled on a yoga practice that deepened into a meditation practice, took me to Thailand on a Buddhist meditation retreat. And I just dove in wholeheartedly, and I knew that I had to change my life. And that's exactly what I did. I changed my life through the practice of yoga and meditation. And I have now somehow manifested owning a yoga dome, which is a geodesic dome right on our property here in Stevensville. And I get to teach, lead, and share the practices that have changed my life with the community every day. We just try to do better, be better, and like I said, tap into those high energy, good vibes, and just create a better lives for ourselves.
Well, let me jump in. I got a few questions there from this story. So you mentioned, and I don't know how specific you want to go, but you mentioned that there were a few sort of, we'll say, big ticket items, big moments where you said, I knew I have to make a lifestyle change. And I feel like that probably resonates with a lot of people. Can you describe one of those moments where you went, hey, something here's got to give?
100%. And I speak from a really honest place and perspective. And basically it was that waking up every single day, hungover, feeling like garbage. I was living a really happy life, like a really good life, lots of friends, lots of socializing, out all the time. And it was that every single morning waking up and feeling like garbage was not where it was at for me. And I had a lot of moments where I was feeling really deeply unhappy. And when I really looked at it, it was the alcohol. It was alcohol infused. It was, living these kind of rough around the edges lifestyles. And that's okay if you do these things. This just was not working for me. And I had hit a very, very dark, deep depression in my late 20s. And I knew that if I did not change the trajectory of my path, that I was not going to make it. That's how serious the drinking had become in my life.
So why yoga and meditation specifically? Why not, some people who have that story, they end up running, they do something else. You gravitated towards yoga and meditation. Why do you think that is?
Running is not my jam at all. Neither is cardio. I have never stepped foot in a gym to this day. And what had happened was I had found myself living on my own, no cable, no internet, just drinking and working at the bar. And I had this $14 yoga mat from Walmart. I had a DVD of yoga that I found in one of my storage boxes. And I put this thing on and I thought, you know what? I'm going to give this a try. And I was doing it every single day for a year straight. And I noticed a change. I noticed that I was moving away from my everyday stresses, thoughts, worries, depressions, all these things. And every time I stepped on this yoga mat, I was kind of settling in thought, settling in body. And I was thinking, wow, this is really something here. And then, of course, I started diving in much deeper, taking lessons in studios, taking trainings. I've taken hundreds and hundreds of hours of training. And I really needed to figure out what this practice was. And boy, did I ever.
Well, you know what? I love that the Yoga Dome is actually a dome. I remember when, the Yoga Dome first, and by the way, how long has the dome been there? It's how long now?
It's been about 2.5 years that we had kind of gone through constructing this thing through COVID.
Right.
So we are in our third summer. That being said, we don't really use the dome in the summer because it acts like a greenhouse. It is legit a tent and a
Oh,
greenhouse.
sure. I believe it.
So we move everything kind of outside into nature and these sorts of things. But yeah, we're in our third summer.
Well, I remember when we'll say the Yoga Dome came to town. I remember talking about it on the Fort Erie podcast, and I remember learning a little bit about your story at the time. And I learned since, of course, that it is a real dome. But that was one of my questions at the time. I'm like, is there really a dome there? And of course, there actually is. You just, it gets obviously very hot, during the summer months. But when you say moving everything outside, I mean, is that tricky with air quality right now? Is that tricky with, some of the thunderstorms we've been having? Has that been an issue at all?
Yeah, and 100%. Like the air quality, I'm not even going to go there with what that is all going on right now. But, we still work towards being present in whatever situation life is throwing at us. That is the practice. Is life is challenging. Things are really difficult in life. And with a practice like yoga and meditation, it gives you tools to kind of either lean into that, accept that, work through that. So with the air quality, we've still been outside. We've been doing things. And this is the very first summer that we have kind of brought in a bigger air conditioning unit. It's not big by all means, but it will sustain us on, let's say, a rainy day and the sun's not shining. We can still carry on with a class inside the dome if it's raining with the air conditioning on.
Well, let's talk about those classes. Maybe for listeners who aren't familiar, they've never been to your property. What types of classes do you offer? What does the scheduling look like? What does pricing look like? Can you inform listeners?
Yeah, 100%. So right now, we are in slow season. So the yoga kind of vibe is it's slower in the summer months because people are camping, they're traveling, they're doing all these things. But once fall and winter hit, this is where everybody comes back to their yoga practice because we want to do things still. We want to carry on with our lives. It's hard to get people into yoga classes in any studio in summertime because we're all very busy. So right now we're on a little bit of a bare bones schedule. We offer Sunday morning, Monday night, Tuesday nights, and I think Friday mornings. And every class that I offer is always beginner friendly because with the way that I was trained is you come as you are, whether you know anything about yoga or not, you come as you are, and we help you modify, adjust, whatever is needed for your practice. We definitely help you with that. And then once we hit fall season, we run 7 days a week, several classes, morning and night. And we have several other teachers coming in, and you can do it one of two ways. You can drop in onto the website and reserve your spot in class. Classes range from about $18 to $22, just depending on what the class is. And then you can also sign up for like a class pass. If you want to commit a little bit more to your practice, we offer 10 class passes, 20 class passes, and that gives you a little bit of a commitment to yourself and the practice. And a lot of people do that in the fall as well.
You mentioned the website. What is the website?
The website is theyogadome.ca.
Theyogadome.ca. Okay, got it. And I'm going to ask you about your social media presence and some of that shortly, because I want people listening to follow you. But just before I forget, what is the exact location? Because you're on Ridgemount Road, right? Where exactly are you?
Yeah, so we actually back right onto the QEW. We are 2873 Ridgemount Road, and we're not a drop-in. Like, you can't just arrive and, hey, I want to check you out. It's always kind of by appointment only or book your class online. If the gate is closed, that means that we're not here or we're doing something else. But if the gate is open, you're more than welcome to come in and drive down to the back where the dome is. You can access me right on the Yoga Dome website if you have any questions, comments, and that sort of thing. I'm pretty quick to respond to emails and things of that nature. But yeah, 2873 Ridgemount Road, right off a Town Line Road, so the other end of Highway 3.
Got it. And I did want to come back to your social media and two things. I mean, one, feel free to plug any of your social media accounts because I think you, I follow you on social media. That's no secret. I think you do a fantastic job with, representing your brand and what you're all about. But the other part two of the question is, do you find a lot of your customers? Do you make a lot of new connections through social media? Thank
you for those comments, first of all.
Yeah, no, you're doing a great job. You really are.
I take pride in all the social media I do, all the posters, all the content, all the website I have learned myself. And it's all been trial and error, sitting down, figuring it out, learning how to do it. And I'm also a creative. So this is where I can really get into that creative aspect, is the social media kind of part of it, making the posters and these sorts of things. So yeah, the social media part is fun. Mind you, I don't like being on video that much. So hence why this podcast has kind of popped up as well.
Yeah.
But all the stuff you see is me sitting when I wake up in my morning and have a little meditation practice. I get to work onto content, things like that. And we have seen people from, oh my gosh, everywhere, all over, as far as Toronto, Newmarket.
Really?
Now I'm starting to get quite a bit of people from Buffalo coming over. They're basically saying they're 15 minutes away.
Well, they are.
Yeah.
I mean, why not? Why not? So, but are a lot of those people coming in and saying, hey, I found you on Facebook or I found you on Instagram?
100%. Yeah.
Wow.
They have found us that way. And sometimes I do have to pay to put things in people's faces because the way that the algorithms work and all the stuff I don't understand. Like, why is nobody seeing this stuff? But every once in a while, you put a couple dollars towards it. And I always ask people, how did you find us? How did you see us? And I'm going to tell you, it's 50-50. It's 50% word of mouth. And then the other thing is social media.
Well, it's tough to argue with the cost, even when you do end up, because, in real estate, I spend money on Facebook ads as well, promoting this podcast. Right. I mean, we all do, because the relatively small cost to get targeted eyeballs on what you're promoting is pretty amazing. And it speaks to your content, though, that not only you get in front of people, but then they actually take action on it. What platforms do you want listeners to follow you on? Instagram, Facebook, and what are your handles?
Instagram for sure. That's my favorite platform right now. That is at the Yoga Dome.
Okay.
And that's where we kind of generally post the most.
Okay.
And then Facebook is at the Yoga Dome Studio. And if people want to personally follow me, they can follow me on my Facebook. It's Ashley Michelle. And my personal Instagram is at Life of a Yoga Teacher.
It's Fort Erie's answering machine, the Byrd Box.
I'm going to return to my chat with Ashley Michelle coming up in a moment. We'll get to the second half of our conversation, but first it's time to check the Byrd Box, play the messages that you've left Fort Erie. As a reminder, you can call the Byrd Box anytime you like, 24 hours a day. You can squawk about anything you like. The number's 289-599-BYRD, Byrd, and I play those messages right here during this segment of the show. So let's first begin with a call about the new Barbie movie.
Hey, I just wanted to talk about the Barbie movie. I think it's ridiculous, and Barbie as humans is so crazy to me, and I think it's completely overrated.
Well, is it overrated? I don't know. Did you see the movie? I haven't seen it. I actually have no idea. It actually sounds like this caller's biggest concern about the Barbie movie is that, they cast real human beings, Ryan Gosling and Margot Robbie, to play these plastic dolls. So I don't know. I don't know if that would be my biggest concern. I've read mixed reviews. A lot of people seem to really like the movie. They felt it had an important message. Others felt it was a bit heavy-handed with its message. Frankly, being a dad with a busy career in real estate, I don't have a ton of time to watch movies these days. And so I tend to shy away from movies that have a message. I don't know if that makes sense to some of you listening. It's like I get so little time in a day to do recreational things that the idea to me of sitting down to watch, say, a 2-hour movie that's going to it sounds so ignorant, but try to teach me something. It just does not sound appealing to me. I will say, however, that the Barbie movie has done a great job with their marketing, because you can't go anywhere without seeing a promotion for this movie. So listeners, leave your opinion on the Byrd Box. If you've seen the movie, let us know what you thought. This one or Oppenheimer, obviously, they're the two big sort of summer blockbusters, 289-599-2973. Now, the second message, this man wants to get something off his chest here. Let me play it.
Why are bikes still allowed on the road? I'm talking about motorbikes, by the way. They're clearly dangerous.
So I'm just going to pause it there. I'll restart the message here from the beginning. But just to clarify for listeners, I played through this message already. When he says motorbikes, I think he's talking about motorcycles. Just to make sure that's clear, let me start over the message.
Why are bikes still allowed on the road? I'm talking about motorbikes, by the way. They're clearly dangerous. They turn any accident into a deadly one, or at the very least, a life-altering disability. You know, we're not allowed to go without seatbelts. But if you forego the rest of the car along with the seatbelt, all of a sudden it's legal again. Sincerely, someone who was just cut off by a whole bunch of motorbikes on the QEW.
And there it is. The truth comes out. He got cut off. Yeah, you know what? It's pretty annoying being cut off by one motorcycle, two motorcycles, a whole gang of motorcycles, these bikes weaving in and out of traffic. Yeah, there are some people who obviously ride recklessly, but there's a lot of people who don't as well. A lot of people do ride safely. I know a lot of people locally who ride motorcycles recreationally, especially down Niagara Boulevard on Sunday afternoons. They have no issues. It's like a camaraderie thing. So I mean, I've got no real issue with it, but it is interesting. You know, you raise the question that, hey, how come we get a ticket for not wearing a seatbelt, but if you forego, as he puts it, forego the rest of the car and the seatbelt, then it's totally fine. I don't know, man. I don't know. I'm going to guess that you don't have a motorcycle. That's my guess. And I'm going to guess that if you did have one, you might feel differently. That's just what I'm assuming. But anyway, two great messages today. Folks, around town, you can leave a message on any topic, any subject, 289-599-2973.
Have something you want to squawk about? Let the whole town know what's on your mind. Call the Byrd Box at 289-599-2973. That's 289-599-BYRD.
I don't like to spend too much time on self-promotion on this show, so I'm going to keep this segment short. But I wanted to ask, some of you, dear listeners, are you on TikTok? I'm just curious. I'm on TikTok. I don't know if you knew that. I know a lot of you who listen to this show are on Facebook. It's probably where you heard about the Fort Erie podcast in the first place, but I am at Buy with Brent pretty well everywhere. If you follow me on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, Threads, wherever, my username is at Buy with Brent, at BUY with Brent. But the one I don't talk about too often is TikTok, because I'm also at Buy with Brent on there, but the content that I publish to TikTok is a little different than what you'll find on other platforms. You might be asking, well, what kind of stuff do you post, Brent? Are you making TikToks about real estate? Sort of, kinda, but it's more what I'll call the light side or the humorous side of real estate. The videos are silly. I mean, the videos that I'm making on TikTok are me poking fun at real estate, kind of ribbing realtors in general. I've got a few different series I do on there. Like one is called Things You Can Find on MLS, where I collect some shocking, surprising, weird photos I found on MLS, and I'll kind of put them together and sort of poke fun at those. I've got another series called Things Realtors Say But Probably Shouldn't, because realtors are full of marketing slogans and sometimes just outright silly things that we say. And I've got another one called Things You'll Learn in Real Estate School that highlights some of the bizarre things you learn when you become a realtor that you don't really ever use on the job. Things like meets and bounds descriptions and how many square feet there are in an acre, that type of thing. And then I've got a few just kind of silly, short, one-off videos like this one I did. I'm going to play it for you here. Now, I can't play the video portion of it. Obviously, this is just the audio. But I was wondering the other day about the functionality of half bathrooms. Have a listen. Why is it called a half bath? A powder room, I could understand, a two-piece even. But a bath is literally the only thing you can't do in a half bath. You can't even take half a bath in a half bath. And then another one of my pet peeves is when people can't say the word realtor correctly, and it happens all the time. Check this one out. It's pronounced realtor. Realtor, not realtor. That is all. Anyway, if you think you might enjoy more kind of silliness like this, the lighter side of real estate, consider giving me a follow on TikTok. I will follow you back. I've got about 70 videos on there. I'm sure at least a couple of them will make you chuckle.
You're listening to the Fort Erie Podcast.
Now, I promised you I wasn't going to ask you any real tricky questions. We're not going to get into calculus or anything today, but I'm
Thank
just,
God.
You know, I do my best. I try to please the people, right? But you did mention that, I mean, people coming in from Newmarket and Buffalo and all over the place, they would have to pass several other yoga studios to get to yours. So my question is, what is it about your yoga practice, let's say, that and I'm not asking you to put down competitors by any mean, but what might be different about the experience at the Yoga Dome versus somewhere else?
Well, this is what we talked about in our last podcast, was the manifestation of the Yoga Dome. And at first I really thought like, okay, it is the dome. It's the dome itself. People are drawn to this thing. It's a beast, right?
Yeah.
However, my whole entire being is so invested in this project and getting people to connect in with themselves. So I knew if I could just get people here, if I could get them here, step foot into the Yoga Dome, to get on their yoga mats so that they could experience the dome as a whole, the practice as a whole, and then they could really experience themselves as a whole. And that is the true practice of yoga and meditation.
It sounds almost there, and this is probably going to tie into us talking a bit about the podcast and what it means to be woo, but it sounds like there's a little bit of an X factor there almost. They visit the property and there's a connection there to it. Is that a fair statement?
Very fair. And really, truly, it is trying to provide people with something that is really special, really unique. I have taken a lot of training. As I said, I've been in this business and industry for quite a while now, and I really connect to people in the way where, and I'm not like trying to toot my own horn, but people say they feel safe here, they feel comfortable here, they feel relaxed here. And that's because I'm just a very open, honest book, as I'm sure you can tell. Right?
Yeah.
So anybody and everybody is welcome anytime, as long as the gate's open.
As long as the gate's open. That's the disclaimer.
Yeah.
Well, I did want to dive into the podcast because it's refreshing to speak to another podcaster in the town of Fort Erie, because there aren't a ton of us, right? So
right, I've learned this. There's not that many.
No, there's not a ton of us, and the Spiritual Woo podcast. You're a few episodes in now. I feel like woo is one of those words that nobody used 10 years ago, and now it has a very, very clear meaning. Let's say, can you describe for listeners what it means to be woo for anybody maybe who didn't get the memo on that one?
Right. Okay. So in the kind of wellness spiritual space, there's this term that we hear, and it's called spiritual woo-woo, like woo-woo, right?
Yeah.
And spiritual woo-woo is kind of like people are thinking, we're over here doing metaphysical, unscientifical, alien woo-woo things, right?
Right.
So this spiritual woo, as in like woo, this is the stuff that like moves you. This is the stuff that shakes you to your core. This is the stuff that changes your life, like it changed mine. Some people need a really harsh awakening or like a really big like realization like I had. And that's what the woo is. And the spirituality part of it, it can be whatever you want, whatever your religion is, whatever your caste is, whatever that may be. We're all connected. And that's the idea. We're all connected to some sort of spirit, whatever that may be. And that's kind of what I'm trying to promote. Whatever you feel, whatever you need, whatever you have to do to kind of connect to yourself so that you can connect to others and the planet and your gods, whatever it is. That's what the spiritual woo is.
Okay, well, I'm not going to be as emphatic on the woo as you are, but Spiritual Woo podcast is available, I assume, all the usual places: Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube. Is that right?
You got it.
You can tell it's like I'm using every episode to plugging. Don't forget to subscribe, because what I've found, and I know you're only a few episodes in at this point, but what I found is that, and maybe it's just our demographic in the town of Fort Erie, I don't know, but asking somebody to go subscribe on Spotify, they look at you like you have three heads. And so I've got like the FortEriePodcast.com, so you can just stream it in your browser, and that tends to be where about we'll say 50% of my downloads come from, or people just streaming it through the website. Have you found the same thing so far, or do you find your audience is maybe a little more tech savvy?
No, it's, because our audience is, especially in the yoga world, we have 15 to 80-year-olds, right? So
right.
It's all over the place. I actually have put Spiritual Woo podcast right slam on the homepage of the Yoga Dome.
Oh, good.
And you can just click that button and it will bring you to our, whatever it is, our platform, which is Buzzsprout. That's what I use. And you can listen to it right from there, or you can listen to it on Apple, Spotify, Google, whatever the case may be. But you go to theyogadome.ca and you can access it right there directly.
And that's probably the easiest way to do it. But for
think so.
For those of you listening out there, I'm saying this on behalf of both myself and Ashley, you got to subscribe somewhere, even if it's on YouTube, so you get a notification when a new episode comes out. Unless do your episodes come out the exact same day, same time, like every week, or is it
every Monday morning, 8 a.m.
Every Monday morning, 8 a.m. Got it. And the topics are covering things like you talked about manifestations in one episode. What other kind of content have you either already covered or will you be covering coming up?
Yeah, so we have gone through basically, I'm on my third episode, so we've talked about spiritual woo and how we got here. We have talked about manifestation in the Yoga Dome as a whole. Next week, I have my first guest on, Sherry Dixon, who's Fort Erie native. She's going to talk about her psychic journey. And then after that, I'm going to get into a little bit of my sobriety journey and what that looks like, what tips and tricks I've used. And I know a lot of people in the wellness space, and I will be reaching out and looking for future guests to come in and share about their journey, if they're in the wellness space, teaching and sharing, or if something like yoga and meditation has changed their lives. I definitely will be on the hunt to chat with some people about that as well. And we're just going to talk about all the things that move you, Brent, all those good things.
I love it. And if somebody listening wanted to either recommend a guest or nominate themselves even or whatever, as you know, because they're in the wellness space, what's the best way they should contact you? Through social media or some other method?
Any of them. If it's going to be on at the Yoga Dome on Instagram, if it's going to be right at theyogadome.ca, if you want to find me, Ashley Michelle, and I run all of it and access all of it. So wherever and whichever platform, it will always be me on the other end.
That's great. Well, I love that you're so approachable. So let me ask you this to kind of wrap things up. What else would you like people in the town of Fort Erie to know, either about yourself, about the Yoga Dome, the podcast, wellness in general? What is something you are just itching to tell people? Honestly, really, it is if you are struggling in life with anything, be it, challenges every day, be it alcoholism. I'm not a doctor. I'm not anything like that. But if you are struggling and you are searching for a true heart shift and a true change in your life, I promise you that this practice, yoga and meditation, you don't even need to come to me. You can definitely find something, like I said, much deeper, much bigger than your problems. And I know that might sound a little harsh, but really, truly, this is what this practice is about. And I'm such a pusher and a promoter of yoga, meditation, compassion practices, wellness, really, truly, especially after this COVID. Yes, we're all kind of back to normal now, if you will, but what we all went through was very, very traumatizing, to say the least, right? Sure. And
so we can find tools and things to really help elevate our everyday lives to tap into that happiness, that joy, those really kind of high vibe feelings.
It's interesting that you bring up COVID. Now, I've never used the word traumatic necessarily to describe it, but I was noticing a trend over the last several podcast interviews I've done that it is impossible to ask a person about the last couple years of their business, or even if they're involved in our community in some other way, some social cause, without entering the context of what happened during the COVID-19 pandemic. It's impossible to have a conversation with somebody without talking about either what happened then or the effects that are still lingering today. So I appreciate you addressing that, bringing that up.
100%. Like this is here, we all went through this together as a collective. And like I said, we're back to normal. We're having a good time. But I won't get too deep, but remember how scary it was, right? Like we were very scared at the very beginning and all these things, that stuff sticks with you. That stuff kind of stays in there. And unless you do these kinds of practices, movement, breathing, mindfulness to get it out and move past it, that's where it's at for me.
I love that. Thank you so much for spending some time with me today, Ashley. I really appreciate that.
Thank you for having me. You are such a huge supporter of the community. And I just want to say thank you for creating and bringing awareness to local people, businesses. Like kudos to you, friend.
This month in Fort Erie history.
The battle known as the Siege of Fort Erie happened in August 1814. In other words, this month in Fort Erie history. This battle, the Siege of Fort Erie, was widely regarded as one of the most brutal and bloody battles of the War of 1812. It occurred towards the tail end of the war, and I'm going to recap what happened for you. Let me just say two things. First is that if all this war stuff you find kind of grim and gruesome, don't worry. I've got a fun way to end today's episode, and that's going to be coming up in a minute. But the second thing I want to mention is that I am not a historian, guys. I'm not a history teacher. I have no authority to talk about these events, okay? I'm recapping them as I understand them. But if you want a more in-depth look at the siege of Fort Erie, my suggestion is to go to the old fort August 12th and 13th. So just coming up this weekend, because the annual reenactment will be taking place. This happens every year. It's actually very cool. If you've never been before, people come from all over the US and Canada to participate in this, like real war and history enthusiasts. And they come, dressed appropriate for the time period, and they're firing muskets, and they do like the full battle thing with cannons going. And there's like merchants and old timey stuff to look at. It's very cool. I highly recommend you check it out if you've never been before. Just bear in mind, you're going to probably end up parking pretty far down Dominion Road and walking over. But on paper, okay, as far as this battle goes, the siege of Fort Erie, if you ask most Americans what they learned in their history textbooks, they will simply tell you Americans were victorious and this battle was a complete failure for Great Britain. And remember, I say Great Britain because Canada was not Canada until 1867. This was still Great Britain at the time. That was the whole premise of the war. America declared war on Great Britain. And of course, our territory was right there for the taking. Now, Fort Erie, of course, belonged to the British. And then on July 3rd, 1814, the Americans captured Fort Erie. They used it as home base for the Battle of Lundy's Lane, which would happen July 25th, 1814, which was a hard-fought battle for the Americans. And then beginning August 4th, 1814, the British decided to storm the fort to attempt to reclaim it. And that battle, by the way, lasted over a month. My impression of all this is that after the Battle of Lundy's Lane, the British decided let's not ease up pressure on the Americans, so let's go reclaim Fort Erie so they have nowhere left to hide here in Upper Canada. Now, the British were more or less slaughtered. I mean, the encounter resulted in mass casualties for the British, many due to battle, but a lot simply due to terrible living conditions and sort of the nearby encampments. Illness spread like wildfire. And to make a long story short, the Americans remained in control of the fort. And that was basically the way it went until the end of the war, when the Treaty of Ghent was signed in February of 1815. So basically, Americans at that point abandon Fort Erie. They just up and leave because the war is over. And the British, now Canada, basically stroll back into the fort, put our flag up, and now we claim it as our own again. Once the Americans lost interest. So that's sort of the cynical way of looking at this battle, because there really was more significance to the siege of Fort Erie. Because even though the American forces repelled the British in August 1814, there is an argument to be made that the conflict itself, which lasted, well over a month, prevented American forces from further penetrating the area, what was known as Upper Canada at the time. And that's the part that Canadian textbooks make sure to mention, of course. That's also why Fort Erie is called Fort Erie, largely because of, the fort is there and it was called Fort Erie. It's in proximity to Lake Erie, but also because there was significance, to the events that occurred there. So for more information about, this conflict, the War of 1812 in general, I do recommend heading to the reenactment on August 12th and 13th. I'll be there. If you run into me, say hi. My wife loves this reenactment. She wants to go every year. She likes the war reenactments, which is, that's her thing. You can also get more information about the reenactment by visiting NiagaraParks.com.
TheFortEriePodcast.com.
When I relaunched the Fort Erie podcast back in May, I endeavored to borrow some of my favorite things from live radio and try to incorporate them into my podcast. So things like calling in, having like a call-in voicemail box where you could leave messages that I could play, having, kind of live games, trivia competitions where two callers go head-to-head for prizes. Even like the transitions between segments are like radio-style DJ drops. And so today, what I thought I would do to end today's episode is pay homage to one of my favorite morning radio show of all time, which would be the Biggs and Bar Show with Pasty Jamie, which used to be on 97.7 Hits FM, based in St. Catharines. And then a couple of years ago, those guys left Niagara for Ottawa. They're now on Shea 106. And when I say pay homage to their show, they do a segment that they used to call Drunk Podcast. I believe they now call it Tipsy Talk. And what they'll do is they'll take a previous segment that they have done and play it back in slow motion so that the three of them basically sound like they've had something to drink. Okay, so that's exactly what I'm going to do. Earlier in the show, I was discussing my thoughts about Crocs, and that's what that segment might have sounded like if I'd had a few drinks beforehand. Turns out it's true. There really are stores that sell nothing but Crocs. I'm also going to confess here that I have never worn Crocs because I think they're ugly. I think they look dumb. They do, man. Sorry. They look so dumb. Hey, if you love Crocs, I get it. I mean, people who own Crocs, they can't go 5 minutes without telling you how comfortable their Crocs are and how they're a new convert. They swore they would never wear this awful footwear. They would never, ever buy Crocs, but then they did, and now they love it, and you should try it too. And I have no time for any of that. Anyway, I'm going to stop it there. That was my version of Tipsy Talk. I hope you enjoyed it. Hey, thanks for listening to today's episode. This was number 63. Number 64 will be on its way. Make sure to subscribe to the Fort Erie podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, wherever, so that you get a notification when episode 64 comes out. Also, be sure to check out the Yoga Dome and the Spiritual Woo podcast. Follow Ashley Michelle on social media. And hey, you can follow me on TikTok too. For the lighter side of real estate, follow at Buy with Brent on TikTok. Be sure to get yourself into my Green Acres 50-50-50 giveaway. Remember, 3 $50 gift cards to Green Acres I'm giving away this month. If you want to get free admission to Safari Niagara, free child admission, be sure to grab a Happy Meal at McDonald's. And for the love of God, if you own Crocs, throw them in the trash. They're ugly. That's all for today. Bye.
You've been listening to the Fort Erie Podcast with your host, Brent Jones. Never miss an episode. Subscribe on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or visit theforteriepodcast.com.